Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name's Jeff Thomas, and it's the Triple Jeff Show today. With me is our illustrious co-host, Jeff Rutt. Say hello to the people, Jeff.
Hello to the people.
And we have Jeff Shore with us. So when everybody's like, hey, Jeff, stay with us. And you have to listen to the voices to tell the difference. But Jeff runs a company called Shore Consulting. He's a real estate expert, a sales trainer, an author, a speaker, a part-time pastor. We're not sure what he can't do, but we're going to find out what he can do today. Jeff Shore, thanks for being with us today.
I appreciate that, Jeff Thomas. And you know how you meet somebody for the first, what do you do? And you never, how do I explain that? I don't know how it is. Because I've come to learn, even my kids don't fully grasp all of the things that I do. So I'm not sure how to explain it on an airplane either, come to think of it.
That's you're not alone. I was speaking to a friend of mine from church, and he said his daughter, everybody was asking in class what her dad did. And she said, my dad colors things yellow. And he's a lawyer. So that's what she thought. He just colors things yellow. Whenever he's home working, he colors things yellow with a highlighter. So
I like it.
You can keep it simple. But Jeff Rutt, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah, you don't want to leave out the hockey portion of your hockey career. But Jeff Shore, tell us about the early years of Jeff Shore. Family, spiritual formation. Yeah. How in the world did you get into sales training and writing books?
Oh boy. Well, let's see. I grew up in the Northern California, Bay Area of the Northern California, lower middle class family. Dad was a bus driver. Mother was a nurse. Not a lot of money in the house. There were 6 of us in a little 1,100 square foot house, 1 bathroom. I'm not sure how we did that, but you figure it out. It's all you know, right? When you're a kid. But was raised Mormon. And that was an interesting endeavor as well. And when my parents divorced, when I was in high school, I went to live with my father, and that's where everything really just sort of changed for me. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I went into, frankly, I just walked away from church and God and everything else, and went to a pretty dark path for several years. So I have stories to tell that only get told at like 2 a.m. at a Waffle House. You know those stories that you only tell, and we don't have Waffle Houses out here, so those stories just don't get told.
But just picture the Waffle House now. We're going to take you back to the Waffle House. Maybe not.
Could.
I don't know. Maybe we could. Okay.
Yeah, it's probably best if we just bury those. Out there.
So,
yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
It sounds like I know one of your principles. I happen to know in your 4-2 principle is current dissatisfaction. It sounds like 6 folks inside a 1,100 square foot rancher. There would probably been some current dissatisfaction.
There indeed there was. There's no question about it. But listen. Again, you grow up with what you grow up with. That's just the way it is, and you don't know any different. But advancing ahead quite a bit. Now I'm in my early 20s, and again, I've got some substance abuse issues. It just the life is sort of gone off the rails. And then I get the phone call from this cute waitress that I've been seeing who announces that she's pregnant. And I said, well, good luck with that and enjoy the rest of your life. And, and she said, you're in this or not, it's up to you, but I'm keeping this baby. And it was just an absolute miracle, because at that point started to figure out, wow, I'm living for somebody besides myself all of a sudden, which is the first time that thought had popped into my head for a long, long time. And we stayed together, and one day we said, we're this weird, strange, non-traditional family. maybe we should do what families do. Let's go to church. And so we did a diligent search to find a church that met on Sunday evening so I could sleep in on Sunday morning. That was my only requirement. But I had no idea what was going to happen to me when I walked through that door. But that's when God got a hold of my life, and I was able to see really for the first time that God was not impersonal, God was not distant, God was not heavy-handed, but in fact that we had someone who was tempted in every way just as we are, but without sin. I'm quoting Hebrews 4 here, and that was it. I was so sold out that I went forward, and there was no altar call. I just went forward anyway. That's a true story. Yeah, it's a true
Wow.
story. Yeah,
I'm coming up.
Yeah.
Who's with me?
I think I really shocked the preacher that night. But yeah,
I bet.
So,
Wow.
That's
That is
fantastic.
powerful. That is powerful, Jeff. Yeah.
Now,
and I will say
people
that to
who have
this day, I have a soft spot in my heart for people who are in need of grace, because you know, when you look at it, you say, I wasn't raised all the way through with this squeaky clean record. I mean, I went off the rails, and so I can communicate with people who are there now or have been there, and I think that that's how God uses all of us in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So walk us through from a career standpoint.
Yeah.
What did that look like? And you're in your 20s now.
Yeah, waiting tables at a steakhouse, and when you do that, you get home at night, you're wired, and so you can't sleep. So I watched this late night infomercials, 1 a.m, where this guy was telling me how I can buy and sell real estate using other people's money with all of these techniques that you can find if you just spend $199 on his 12 cassette tapes. So that's what I did. I bought the cassette tapes, found out that most of what he was doing was sketchy at best, illegal at worst. The guy eventually did go to jail, but it started the bug. I said, this real estate thing is interesting. Got licensed, got into real estate sales, and then over it's a few years in resale. But then I found my niche in the world of new home sales, started working for a home builder as a salesperson, sales manager, vice president of sales, eventually national sales director for one of the largest home builders in the United States. And it was just, I just knew I had found my lane. I love the business so much. And specifically, the transformation then was to understand not just the sales side of the business, but more importantly, the customer side of the business. And as you know, Jeff Rudd, that is what we do. We specialize in the way that people make decisions, and how do we make it easy for them to do that without being manipulative or pushy in any way. What do we do to help people do what they've always wanted to do? And the sense of satisfaction in that has been beautiful in working with tens of thousands of sales professionals and sales leaders over the years. We just celebrated this is our 25th anniversary of Shore Consulting. It's been a great ride.
Wow. So how much of that, and thank you for what you have been through Shore Consulting, how the influence that you've had on our sales team at Keystone Custom Homes, especially, I'll never forget your weekly message the week COVID broke, and the calming effect and hey, things are never as good as they seem like they are, and there's never as bad as they seem like they are. And it was just very, very settling, and just really appreciate, as I mentioned, gold standard of sales training in the industry. Really appreciate what you do professionally, and appreciate your partnership with Hope International as well. But I want to go back to the 20s, your 20s, and then your career. You just talked about being involved in sales management and working your way up through the hierarchy there. How much impact did that have on the books that you've written? How many books have you written now, Jeff?
I think 11. I think we just put out number 11. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and amazing. If you haven't read Jeff Shore's books, we're going to put links to all of them in the show notes. But how much impact did those early formation years in your career have on both the books you've written and the consulting that you do?
Yeah, well, a tremendous impact. But as is often the case in life, we never know in the moment where the impact is going to take us down the road. So,
Mm.
for example, I was in no position to go to college right out of high school. Nobody in my family had ever been to college. And so the idea of going to college right out of, in my head was just not there. So subsequently, I didn't take my first college class until my second child was born. And of course, then I paid my own way through college.
Wow.
And at that point, and now I'm already in the executive ranks here as I'm doing that. But I was I felt like I'm supposed to do this. I don't know. I was sort of giving into the culture, like,
Mm.
you've made a critical life error if you didn't go to college, which is
Mhm.
ironic now because the number of people that have asked me about my college degree in the last 20 years equates to approximately zero. But because I was pursuing an education on my terms and on my dime, and I was doing it while I was working as a young executive in the industry. Everything became much more real, and that's when I started to just think on a different plane. College really did work for me. I still reference some of the work that we started way back then, including the buying formula, which is, you mentioned current dissatisfaction as one component of the buying formula. That originated in a college class, but while I was working as an executive at the time.
Okay.
And so
Interesting.
that's when it really started to look at it and say, I'm really interested in the way salespeople sell, but I crossed a bridge in my late 20s to say, you know what? I think I'm more interested now in the way that buyers buy. And if
Mm.
I can figure out the way that buyers buy, then we can reverse engineer the way we want to sell to them to make it easy to do what they want to do anyway. So that was foundational to sort of where my thinking went next.
Wow. And it's radically different than a lot of sales consultants would teach, and it's a beautiful thing.
So how did you
Appreciate that.
shift now coaching is very different from playing. You
Yeah,
know, a lot of the best players in all kinds of sports are not the best coaches. Okay.
correct.
Michael Jordan comes to mind. I'm not sure that he would be the best coach ever, but amazing player. When did that change for you to move from sort of player to coach?
Well, when I became an executive, went into the executive ranks, and eventually I was national sales director for one of the largest home builders in the United States. And they asked me, when I took that job, they said, we need to put together a comprehensive training program, which is interesting because I've never put together a comprehensive
Exactly.
training program. But that began that field of study. And so I was, at the risk of sounding arrogant, I was a very, very good salesperson. I was the number one salesperson on my team for several years running, but I could not really have told you why, and I couldn't have
Right.
replicated myself.
Right.
And so I had to look at it and say, there's got to be something here that is going to be a little bit more formulaic that can be taught. And that's when I really became much more of a student than a practitioner. And I think that's, there's, when you look at the success of not a lot, I would dare say everyone who has found success in business, there was a period of study outside of college that they had to go through in order to figure out what they were going to do. And this was mine. And when I was national sales director, I was much more of a student than an expert. I didn't have any thought that I was going to go out on my own, by the way, at the time. They left me before I left them. But that foundational time certainly allowed me to be able to put in place what is now the body of work that we do at Shore Consulting.
Okay, so you're national sales director. By definition, now you got to teach other people how to do it. You've been doing
Yeah.
it intuitively.
Yes.
Now you got to write this thing down, but that doesn't mean you're good at that. There was some other gift, I guess, you had to be able to sort of translate that into a language that people could understand. What was the key to that, you think?
Well, look, I think even when I look at spiritual gifts, I mean, I don't want to sound arrogant. We all have different spiritual gifts, but my gift in regards to teaching and exhortation
Okay.
were evident in my Christian walk. And so I always knew that I sort of had that in me. And people would ask me in those opportunities, just a real quick little story. Fairly early on in my Christian life, I was asked to lead a Bible study, and as I know, to lead a Bible study, and we're going to be studying Philippians, and I was like, And just a quick clarification, is that in the New Testament? I'm just want to make sure we're clear on this. So this is how out of, I mean, I was just a fish out of water completely. And by the way, huge mistake on part of that church to ask me to do that. But it worked. And I think it worked because it brought out the student in me in that first. I needed to so over prepare because I was so ill equipped. And I would just offer that as a word of advice for business people in general. There are times when we don't step forward because we feel like we are dramatically under equipped. And I do think that there's something to be said for stepping out, raising your hand, moving forward, finding people that you can align with, and finding yourself just dramatically lurching forward to doing something that you didn't think you could do.
Well, that's a fantastic one. Okay. I'm not in the home building industry. I'm in the wealth management business, but I think, most of the people listening to this are business owners or involved somehow. And any business owner in any industry has to sell something or you don't have a business. Okay. So I know Jeff's heard a lot of this. I haven't. So I want to hear a couple of your favorite tips. I know you could go the rest of our time, and I know we can't do that, but I got to hear a couple of your favorites because I know somebody running on the treadmill is asking themselves the same question. We get this sales expert. Give me a couple. Give me a couple of tips here.
Well, I'll do that in the form of what we call the buying formula, the formula for how people buy, which originated out of a textbook from the Harvard Business Review that I read when I was in college, and it talked about organizational change and a formula for understanding organizational change. And I remember looking at that and going, "Huh, what if I adapt this and change that?" And that led to what we call the buying formula. And what it suggests is that people buy when their current dissatisfaction, that is what's wrong now, multiplied by their future promise, what they want their life to look like, is greater than the sum of their cost and fear. So current dissatisfaction times future promise has got to be greater than cost and fear. So you have two motivators that move people forward. You have two inhibitors that hold people back. And in the world of sales, what are we trying to do? We're trying to show people their path on their current dissatisfaction. If they stay where they're at, what happens? And then we're trying to show them what their future promise could be should they choose to walk in this direction. And then we're trying to help them through the idea of this is what it's going to cost, and these are the fears. And so let's just put those out on the table and talk about them openly and freely. And when we look at that on the preponderance of evidence, if the motivators exceed the inhibitors, that's when people move forward. Now, look, you can do that when you're trying to decide whether you want dessert at the end of the meal at the restaurant, because you can ask yourself the question, am I still hungry? Current dissatisfaction. Does that look good to me? There's the future promise. What is the cost? Oh, it's $8 for a cheesecake. Can I handle that? What's the fear that I'm going to feel bad in an hour and a half? We're going to put it all on a scale. We do this all non-consciously, but we do it. We do this without thinking about it. There's this internal scale. And so the job of a great sales professional is to help a customer see through that lens so that they're more wise on what it is that they're trying to do.
Gotcha. So if you'd like to stay in your 1,100-foot place with 6 people, how, as Jeff illustrated,
well,
how does that make you feel?
And one of Jeff's favorite lines is, "Tell me more about that." Right?
Yeah.
Jeff say, yeah. Tell me more about, tell me more, Jeff.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Listen, if you were in the business of influence, and I think we all are to some extent or another, there is that idea that we communicate on surface levels first until there's a level of trust that you want to know even more than that. And so we see this in church all the time. How are you? Fine. And then we just sort of move on, but every now and then somebody will say, no. How are you? And how's your walk? And how many days did you spend with your Bible open in your lap this week? Right now, suddenly, this is a version of tell me more. And I preach this all the time, that our conversations cannot stop at the shallow surface level. In sales, in any area of influence, we have to be able to go deeper. And I am convinced that people want to share more. They are just not convinced that the people that are talking to want to know more. So the idea of tell me more, let's go deeper on that. It's not just a good sales skill, although it's a profound sales skill. It's a good life skill. It's a good way to run your life.
Well, you made mention, that's such a good tip, by the way. But the you made mention kind of in passing when we were asking about the transition from sort of corporate to consulting, that maybe the decision was made for you. And of course, we always like to tell a setback story. That seems like there's a setback story. Every salesperson has a million setback stories because mostly you get no's. But that sounded like a pretty big one. Maybe unpack that for us if you don't mind.
Well, it was interesting because I worked for 11 years, or what we like to say 44 quarters, for this big public company, and it was brutal. I mean, it was brutal, and it was interesting because it was a fairly high management turnover company. So 11 years. I mean, just yesterday I spoke at the Builder 100 conference, and during the introduction, Molly Carmichael, who is the MC, said the notes say he worked for 11 years for this company. He ought to get a medal. And so it was really interesting. And then there was a big reorganization and based on an acquisition. And they said, you know, Jeff, we're going to make you the division president of our Albuquerque, New Mexico division. Well, no offense to Albuquerque, but I had already moved twice. I wasn't going to move my family again. It wasn't going to happen. And we stared across the table and we were at an impasse. And finally it was like, thanks for playing the game. Here's some lovely parting gifts. Enjoy the rest of your career. It was interesting because I didn't technically get fired, but I got a big severance package. And I remember for a week afterwards, just walking around my house in something of a daze, like, you know, what was that all about? And I did not in real time recognize how much of my identity was tied into my position. I mean, my office was on the 6th floor in Wilshire Boulevard overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I mean, I was all that. And I got caught up in that. I didn't see it then, but I certainly understand it now. And as Stephen Covey once put it, what happens when you climb the ladder and climb the ladder and climb the ladder, then one day realize that the ladder is leaning on the wrong wall. And so it took a while for an adjustment period to be able to step away. Having said that, I got a big severance, which allowed a stake in the opportunity to be able to start a consultancy and have a nice little nest egg there. And I worked for a company that had a high management turnover. So they had managers, now executives, that were populating companies all over the United States and Canada. And I could pick up the phone and say, hey, you got any work? And it was just no time at all. I got to get a fax machine. I got to learn QuickBooks. I need business cards. And before you know it, it was just a full-fledged business. So I can't say that I sat down and met with a career counselor and then, you know, went on a 48-hour prayer and fasting time. That's not the way it worked. It's just that I like to think that God had orchestrated everything behind the scenes. And then in one fell swoop, he pulled the curtain back and said, here, this is what I have for you. But until I got to that point, from the other side of the curtain, it was dark. It was. There were some tough times there.
Was your first instinct to consult, or did you think, well, maybe I'll just go get another sales manager job or a director of sales job somewhere else?
Yeah, the first instinct was to go get a different job. And and at that point in my career was like, I want to run an operation. I want to be a division president for a home builder. And so I interviewed, made it down to 2 people for a division president position for a company that went out of business nationally for a few years later. So God protected me there too. But it got to the point, Jeff, where it was like, I got to put bread on the table. At some point, I just have to do something. And it doesn't seem like the doors are opening. The irony of it now is I look back at it, and Jeff, right, you'll appreciate this, I think. I would have been a horrible division president and just terrible. You know, I do like 3 things really, really well. And everything else I'm horrible at. And, you know, Jeff, you run a home building company, you know how many things you have to have under your control at any given time. I'm not a control freak. I don't understand the details. I would have been a complete washout as a division president, but my pride said that was the next step for me. And so those doors closing allowed the door to Shore Consulting to open.
Well, I would have to push back a little bit. I'd say you're being very humble And as Lencioni says, you got the three: hungry, humble, smart at heavy doses. But I don't know that you would have been as happy or passionate about your career as you have been at Shore Consulting and written as many books. So
So
I think God has you where he wanted you.
yeah, so let's
Uh,
take that. So I think
mhm.
obviously where you are in helping other salespeople be more effective, that's a blessing to them to,
Yeah.
have them do well. But of course, this is the Generous Business Owner Podcast. You've been running your own business now for 25 years. How do you
Yeah.
think about that platform as a blessing in other ways?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are so many different ways, and I think that's one of the best benefit of being a successful entrepreneur. And I mean, I do find myself in that category. We're 25 years, and we've got a good name in the industry, and we're able to employ, a lot of people who are making a good living for their families. It's a beautiful thing. And so when I think about the greatest benefit of being a successful entrepreneur, it really is the impact on so many levels to so many people.
Hmm.
It starts with the internal Shore Consulting family. It is just so wonderful to see people thrive within Shore Consulting. We are generous in the way we pay our team, and we want them to be successful. And it has worked out very, very well along those lines. But it has also allowed me the opportunity to write a lot of checks. Now I want to be careful about this because this is one where it's always a little bit awkward when you talk about writing checks. And the reason it's awkward for me is because it's actually much, much easier for me to write a check than to book something into my calendar and give of my time. But when I say easier, I mean more comfortable. It's much more comfortable for me to write a check and support this cause and do that over here. For me, the generosity comes in the giving of my time, which I if I'm I recognize that my time can be an idol if I'm not careful about that. So that is something that I think God is still working on me here to be more active, to be more involved personally. And it's very easy if you're a high income earner and you are used to giving a lot to say, well, I've done my part. Right? Very, very simple to do that. But
Mhm.
when you read scripture, while there is room for financial generosity, that's not the preponderance of advice that you're going to get about the way that you're going to serve. Right? It's much more guerrilla-like. It's hand to hand. It's face to face. It's rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty. And so that has led me more than anything else to looking at it and saying, I'm in the home building industry. I've always had a passion for people who struggle deeply financially. So my service on the board and very active member of the board of what's called the Gathering Inn, which is our local public-private homeless coalition, has been a tremendous blessing to me because I've lived my life in the home building business. It seems to me only appropriate that I should be helping people who need homes to get into homes the most. But the best part of it is that the approach that we are taking in Placer County, which is outside of Sacramento, has been just a model for other counties around us to say, what are you guys doing? Because we are helping people out a stage at a time. How do we move them to bring this up this ladder until then they are in permanent housing? And it's if they need a meal, yes, we'll give you a meal. But we want to do so much more than that at every step along the way. And every time we graduate somebody into permanent housing, it's just a new celebration. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to have your hands in.
Yeah, that's a real process and a real problem in many big cities.
Yeah.
California is at the
Yeah.
top of the list, if you ask me.
We are leading the way. We are indeed.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
glad
Yeah.
somebody in California is doing it right. Just because it is such a big problem and everybody experiences it, almost
Yeah.
in every city. What are, I mean, I love this ladder approach, but maybe what are a couple of the key things that you've been able to do that maybe are lacking in some other organizations?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is meet people where they are. Homelessness is not the problem. Homelessness is a symptom of the problem.
Right.
Mhm.
So you cannot say as a government entity, here's $100 million. Let's go build houses or whatever. First of all, the amount of red tape you're going to have to go through to be able to do that is probably going to get you nowhere in a hurry anyway. You have to be able to look at it and recognize that how you take care of somebody with mental health issues versus somebody else who, they lost their job, they lost their house, what are they going to do? Versus somebody else who's got a chemical dependency. These are all very, very different people. So it starts with our case study workers. Our case study workers are cut out from some other kind of cloth than mere mortals, where they can get deep into one-on-one conversations, track back. What is your story? How did you get to where you are? And now let's look and see what are the attributes that God has given you to be able to move forward and get through this stage of your life. And so we're constantly looking at it saying, how do we graduate people up the ladder? That's the question. We own a number of homes in neighborhoods, 6-bedroom homes that a lot of the neighbors have no idea what's going on there, but they're transitional places for people who have proven that they're responsible enough. They're holding a job. Now this is their next step. They're paying us a small amount of rent on their way to their next step. So how do you find ways? We've got 150 bed shelter. A part of that is for people who are what we call a no barrier shelter. They just need to get off the street. The other one is a high barrier shelter, means you have to test every time you walk through the door. And the key is, how do you get people from the low barrier into the high barrier? And then once you're there, how do we equip you with what's going to happen next? So it's one-on-one. It's not mass government program. It's one-on-one.
I mean, I love that. And okay, and does your Christian worldview ever come into play when you're working with these folks? Have you found a way to integrate that in any of this, or no?
Yes, and as is the case here, and I think we see this in Scripture, God doesn't call us to be able to minister to people spiritually based upon their response. Right? That's just never the case. Jesus healed 10 lepers. One came back. He's asking the question, what happened to the other 9? Right? There is a unilateral nature to the service that you give. But yes, as you are ministering to people, you're going to find that there are, I am absolutely convinced, sold out 100% Christians in homeless shelters. They are there, and they're just going through a season of their life where they need a lot of help. And so, yeah, for sure, that's where you want to be.
Yeah.
Can I jump in here, Jeff Shore? Can you? I want to take a little bit of a rabbit trail here. You have grandkids. How many grandkids?
You got 7, 6 girls and a boy. Yeah.
Seven grandkids. Obviously some influence from grandpa to those grandkids. What have you seen, or what would you like to see them be? How would you like to see them being influenced by your business, by your generosity, your involvement with the homeless? And then also maybe separately, how does it influence other folks on your Shore Consulting team?
Yes. First of all, with my grandkids, boy, there's a lot of prayer on that one right there. There's no question about it. But first and foremost, we regularly have our grandkids stay with us, and it is an important moment for me to have a grandchild come upstairs after a night's sleep and see me sitting by the window with a cup of coffee and a Bible open on my lap. I mean, I want them to know, for me and for Karen, that this is just an important part of the way that we live our lives. But beyond that, now my oldest grandchild is 9, so we're just at that level now where we're able to really start to get deeper about what your life is going to look like, and to recognize she is a wonderful child. She's humble in her way. She's extremely bright, but you can just tell she's not one of the cool kids. Right. And so we're having those conversations about, let's be careful about what the world is thinking about you too much, even at age 9, because there's an audience of one you need to be thinking about here. And if we stay focused there, we're going to be okay. But she has an incredible future in front of her. The job is to pray protection for her, I think, more than anything else. As far as the company goes, it's interesting because there's 15 of us at Shore Consulting. A the majority of us are Christian. There are several that are not. And, it's, we don't jam it down anybody's throat, but we don't hide it either. When we get together for our annual retreat, there's prayer involved. You can participate or not participate. That's up to you. More than anything else, it's a matter, and Jeff, I'm sure you feel the same way. I just need to make sure that knowing that I am representing Christ in my business, that the people who see me at the closest level, my own employees, are not seeing anything that would say, well, I don't want anything to do with Christ if that's what
Yeah.
how Christ manifests in human flesh.
Yeah, absolutely. So just take that one step further, both with your kids, your grandkids, and your team members, as it relates to your work with the homeless. And how does that translate, if at all? Like, is there impact there to there's a lot more caught than taught, and I'm just curious, as we look to pass on that, those values.
Yeah, I would. Well, first of all, I would say that the real serving impact at the Gathering Inn is more tactical in help. Gandhi once said, even God can't talk to a hungry person except in the language of fish, right? So, or in the language of bread, I think it was. And so there's something really tactical and practical there where I can utilize my Christian faith in that. But where the service really takes place is in the church. I am on the pastoral staff at my church. I am so blessed to be able to do that. And that has grown me. When we talk about, since this is about generosity, there's where that generosity of time has really come into play. Because again, easier for me to write a check than to write a calendar appointment. And so to dive into that, and yes, to support the church in a very healthy way financially, but to be able to look at it and say, on a one-on-one basis, that person is struggling. God has put it in my mind right now to reach out. What does that look like?
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I can't tell you how transformational this has been for me in the last 6 years since I joined the pastoral team, because I'm going to confess, for me, I'd see somebody who had a problem. I was like, rub some dirt on it. Life is tough on everybody. You'll get over it. And that's not a card you can easily play.
That sounds like a title, Jeff. Rub some dirt on it. That sounds like a good title.
Book number 12. Hospital visitations. I mean, I used to dread the thought of going to visit somebody in a hospital. And now I proudly pull into that reserved chaplain spot right up front there. And so
awesome.
that's where it really is, where this is where God is really evolving me more than anything else right now in the way that I serve individual members of the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we talk, obviously the common line is talking about time, talent, and treasure. And sometimes treasure is the easy one. And I think you've done a great job of pointing out. And how do you use your time and your talent? That those are interesting things, and harder sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, look, I don't want to sound arrogant, but I do have this spiritual gift of giving. It's not difficult for me to do that. I don't automate my giving to my church. I want to write the check. I want to see that as an act of worship. But that it's not difficult. And the problem is that if it's not difficult, then it's also less sacrificial.
Yeah.
So then you have to ask the question, okay, that means I either have to give more or serve more. So for me, it's that getting into that, if your giving is not sacrificial, then I don't think it's complete. I'm sorry, but I think I'm quoting scripture on that one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is a really good segue. I mean, you gave us some sales training. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We also, I think you've issued a challenge to all of us, including me, about the time. The time, which
so true,
comes with the talent, and getting your feet wet, doing things to help other people directly. I just think that's just a huge challenge for everybody listening, is feeling busy and they're on the treadmill and they're barely had time to get on the treadmill. I was on the treadmill today. 10 whopping minutes. Okay, that's all I had. All right. So
Well, and it's also,
actually, it's just all I wanted to do. That's the truth.
Yeah,
Okay?
right.
That's
what's also interesting, Jeff Shore, is that that's an incredible challenge.
Yes, it is.
It's more about the time, and the time is more sacrificial, but it's also more influential to those around you, because writing the check is usually, that's not something your grandkids or your team members. I mean, it's awesome. But and I do believe it's the and or it's both, or it's both and so that I think you have more influence because that legacy is being built, and you're having that influence on the next generation and those around you.
We're familiar with the Jim Elliott quote that he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And you could apply that to money easily, but you can apply it to your time as well. You don't get to keep your time,
Right.
Great
Right.
point.
you know?
Exactly.
Great
So
point.
there you go.
But okay,
Yeah.
so as we wrap up, you had all kinds of tips, but we always end the podcast with just, okay, that's a lot. Maybe somebody's way behind you on this journey. They're 40 years old. They're just starting to have a little success. They're looking
Yeah.
around and everybody's buying bigger toys, and they're uncomfortable with that. Somewhere in their
Yeah.
soul, they're unsettled and a little uncomfortable with that. So this idea, they're listening to you today and going, man, I'm just not maybe where he is, but what's a step they could take in the right direction to become a little more generous in any way you want to define that?
Yeah, I will. I'm glad you asked this, because I'm awkward about sharing it, but it's such a cool story of the way God works that I got to share it. I work with a business coach I have for many, many years. And 10 years ago, this is in 2013. In 2013, we sat down and we said, let's write some stupid goals. Okay, let's write some goals that you have no idea how you could possibly accomplish. Because 10 years, that's a long time. It's really a long time, right? So nothing wrong with quarterly goals or yearly goals. But when you start thinking 10 years, you can do a lot in 10 years.
Right.
So, and at first I was like, well, I don't know, maybe we'll, do this. It's like, no, come on, let's get crazy. Let's get crazy. So by the time we were done there in 2013, I wrote down a goal. I said, I want to give away more in 2023 than I made in 2013. That was the goal, to give away more in 2023 than I made in 2013. How I would get there? No idea. I was doing pretty well in 2013. So how I would get there? Zero idea. And the giving increased, and the giving increased, and the giving increased, and then in 2023, I was not there yet, but I was like, I'm striking distance. Like this could happen,
Wow.
And then God just miraculously brought back an investment that had long since been dead. I thought, if I could have traded these shares for a coffee and a donut, I would be happy. But it actually ended up being a 6-figure investment that paid off. And so I blew way past what I made in 2013 and my giving in 2023. And so the tip that I would give is, think bravely. Stop thinking small about your giving. Think ridiculous about your giving, and just watch what God will do. I mean, look, the only way that I was able to give is because God has blessed me enough to be able to give.
Yeah.
So, think brave. Think in brave terms about what you could give.
I love it.
I think there's the title, Jeff. Think
bravely.
ridiculously about your giving.
Yeah.
Bravely.
Jeff Shore,
Yeah.
that's inspiring. That's awesome.
I cried. I'm not going to lie. I cried.
Wow.
For sure. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There's also power in writing things down,
There certainly is. Yeah.
something about setting
There is
goals,
that.
writing these things
Yeah.
down, and the likelihood of them coming true. And we've had some amazing people on, like Ed Thomas, who pledged $1 million when he had no idea where that was going to come from. And that tends to show up if you're sort of bold enough to put things out there that aren't you centered. So thanks for that challenge. And Jeff Shore, really thanks for being with us today. It was really a joy.
Yes, thank you.
I enjoyed it very much. God bless for what you guys are doing. This is great. All for the kingdom.
All right. Thank you, Jeff Rutt. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's Generous Business Owner podcast. Share it with a friend. Check us out on generousbusinessowner.com. And follow us, and we will see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.